Hi. I wanted to cover a topic that's extremely important in Mahayana Buddhism, and that's the topic of Bodhicita, or the heart mind of enlightenment, or the heart mind, the heart mind of enlightenment, or the enlightened heart mind, I suppose. The word Bodhicita, as you might have heard a lot, is composed of two Sanskrit roots. One is Bodhi, which means wisdom or enlightenment, and Chitta, which means awareness, not exactly the same as consciousness that flashes from moment to moment to moment, because that's Vijnana. So Chitta can be unconditioned, as in absolute Bodhicita. Now, Bodhicita means specifically, and this is again for Westerners is important to hammer, and that's why I'm doing this video really. Bodhicita means the wish for enlightenment with the intention of becoming a Buddha to save all sentient beings. So is the wish for enlightenment not just for me to be able to levitate or walk through walls, or not wishing for enlightenment as the Hinayana, just to eliminate my own suffering, which is not to be, poo-pooed, but the actual wish, of course, to eliminate my own suffering as if I become a Buddha, fully realized Buddha, but the wish to become a Buddha with the intent of saving all other sentient beings that are suffering in samsara. This is the motivation that will lead to Buddhahood, and no other will. So for Western practitioners, again, that come in, they take Bodhicita casually, they don't understand it. It's very important for you to realize that this is the Mahayana motivation. The wish to not just to become a Buddha, that's part one, but to use the capacities of a Buddha, which could be, being in many locations, reading minds, appearing to people in different forms, also, and so on. The wish to become that to help liberate all sentient beings. Now that I've made that point, the most important point, let me make a second point that it's an argument you will find, it's an argument you will struggle with in your own mind. People will say, well, what good are you doing sitting there in a cushion breathing or whatever, when there's people that are hungry, there's people that are oppressed, look at the government, look at Iraq. Well, the answer to that is in a teaching that says there are three types of giving. Material giving, gift of fearlessness, and the gift of Dharma. So it's the gift of material giving, the gift of fearlessness, and the gift of Dharma. Which means material giving, of course, is the most obvious, the one we're familiar with, and it's the one that people in our society refer to. In order to be useful, you have to be something physical, something material. And this is not to be put down. You should be involved in generosity, the practice of generosity. When you give with the wish that this virtue will go to your enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. That's a paramita of generosity. But still, you should be giving to the hungry, to the unclothed, and so on. But we know that you can give food and give food and give food, and yet people will continue to need food, or help with wars and wars and wars, and more wars will continue. I'm sorry to predict to you that this is no prophecy, right? In the next 50 years, we'll have so many more wars. Unfortunately, some of them pretty much initiated by our country, the United States. And secondly, the gift of fearlessness. This is a higher level giving, not something that people always refer to, but in the West, again, it's important. Like things like the work that ACLU does, that Amnesty International does, to get involved in the prevention of abuse of children, of trafficking and prostitution of children, the torture of prisoners in Guantanamo, torture anywhere, human rights. Sadly, what goes on in the People's Republic of China, no matter how good an economic ally they are with us. All these things, to work for all these things, is the gift of fearlessness, and it again is something that you ought to be involved in as a matter of accruing virtue. However, as a Buddhist, the primary motivation when you do all these things, again, is to turn over the virtue to the enlightenment of all beings, because the third, the gift of Dharma, is the highest and most noble. It's the gift of teachings, as we're doing here right now, that will enable individuals to reach complete liberation from suffering, to clear all the obstructions, emotional, intellectual, and become a Buddha. Which then, as a Buddha, that individual will be in a complete position to help as much as a being can to liberate other beings. So don't forget, if you're a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, Mahayana, like a Zen Buddhist, for example, your highest motivation is to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. Don't shortchange yourself. Don't say, well, that's too high a goal for me. You know, that kind of garbage. This is the goal, and many people have achieved realization in the last 2,000 years. Hundreds, thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. So you will be one. Just continue to practice. I will say one last thing that I wanted to mention, the difference between absolute and relative bodhicitta. As I've discussed before, when we discover the Dharma, our ego, you might say, splits into two. One is the worldly ego, and the other one becomes the Dharma ego that reads and studies and understands that realization is the way to happiness. A worthy goal, and a goal to be held that the ego holds, that part of the ego. Nothing to be put down. So it's a matter of preparation of the personality to receive this flash, this glimpse of absolute nature, or wisdom nature. We have the teaching of Buddha nature, which says your Buddha nature is as good as any Buddha's Buddha nature. That's a quote Socho Rinpoche is fond of mentioning. That means that every sentient being has the potential to be enlightened. You have the potential to be enlightened. So it's not a matter of manufacturing enlightenment, it's a matter of removing the covering, the obstructions to that nature, and then like the sun shines through when the clouds are dissolved, your Buddha nature shines through unconditioned. So the relative bodhicitta practices are the ones that prepare the personality to open, to not block absolute nature, because the ego basically panics under the pressure of the glimpses of nature. The ego seeks to be solid, to be the boss, in control, independent, uncaused, and when true nature flashes through, the ego senses its own flimsiness, its own temporariness, and fights hard to block that because it feels like death, it feels like the end. However, as we learn to let go, as the ego becomes more sublimated, then we're able to allow this nature to shine through. Practices are like a metta, loving kindness practice, when we gradually wish happiness to everyone, from ourselves to our loved ones to our neutrals and so on, to every living thing. Also loving practice, as the other side of the coin of metta, which is when something very good happens to us, then we can breathe that in, that goodness, that good luck, and breathe out a wish that all beings have the same fortune, all the way to every being in the universes, not just even this universe, but every sentient being in every universe of existence. That's vast motivation. We have Tonglen, where we practice breathing in some negative, some bad thing like illness, depression, and so on, using initially a subject, and then breathe out. It sort of flashes into our bodhicitta and becomes burned into, purified into something good. So we breathe out healing, peace, calm to all beings. And so these practices, as well as the other practices of giving,
with the motivation that the virtue of these gifts helps to liberate all beings, including ourselves. All these are bodhicitta practices, and in turn lead to the allowance, the relative bodhicitta practices, which in turn lead to the allowance of absolute bodhicitta. Now, once absolute bodhicitta shines through, it's spontaneous. It's like the rays of the sun are spontaneous. The sun cannot help but shine. And in the same way, a Buddha cannot help but be compassionate, but work for the benefit of other beings. They're all a being made of love and compassion, and they can sense the suffering of other beings. It's as if we're not yet a human being, and we're going to be born as a human being, and you were told, well, you got to practice eating, so that when you are a human being, you eat properly, or you got to practice breathing, so when you're a human being, you can breathe. Well, of course, we as human beings, our nature is to breathe. We could not but breathe. We have to eat. We cannot but eat. It's a pleasure for us. So in our nature, it's